Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here to discuss this very serious development. Certainly, in the RCMP Commissioner, in your own words, are an unprecedented announcement that you and others had made on October 14th, and you had said that the violence orchestrated by India has become, quote, a significant threat to public safety in Canada, with well over a dozen credible and imminent threats to life. And Commissioner Duham, on October 14th, you said that you had clear evidence that links officials from the Government of India to violent crimes in Canada, but you provided no further details at that time, and you said that you needed to protect the open investigations and court proceedings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And at that time, you were of the opinion that those details, if released, could jeopardize the investigation into the murders and other violent acts by India on Canadians and people residing in Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, and I also comment on the evidence that was presented by Deputy Commissioner Flynn in Singapore with Madame Dewey and Mr. Morrison on the schemes or the modus operandi of how the Government of India operates.
And Mr. Durant already mentioned this a bit, but you are aware, of course, of the Washington Post article from that same day on October 14th that includes details of this sensitive information that you had chosen not to share because you felt that it would jeopardize the investigation. Is that correct?
Just for clarity, there's a difference with sensitive information under national security chapeau, but this was the information that's in the article. It was more or less some information from the investigations that we're doing.
So you don't feel that the information in the Washington Post, that those details were sensitive in any way?
Not sensitive to national security as it's portrayed as national security sensitive information. It's information part of investigation, which normally we would like to keep within, but sometimes we do release some information.
So normally you would have kept those details private, but they're of course not private anymore.
I would say on occasion we have come up with some information to stimulate certain things when we're investigating. But this one here, again, is not sensitive, as I mentioned, under the national security definition.
Commissioner, why did you choose not to release the information during your press conference that was at the same time released by the Washington Post? Why were those details kept from the public in Canada?
Because I didn't think at that point it was relevant, that specific information. And again, I wasn't part of the conversation with the Washington Post.
And Mr. Durant, you were part of that conversation with the Washington Post. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. And you felt that those details were not sensitive and would not jeopardize any investigation?
So maybe I can share two things. So the information we shared with the journalists over there were not classified. I would like also, and the job of journalists, it may be better than I do, but journalists have also separate sources. That's something that has to be said. As I said also in my opening remarks, this is someone who has followed India's stories many times. And the information that was disclosed in the Washington Post, I think, are also available elsewhere.
You can confirm then that the information about, for example, the Indian Home Affairs Minister and his alleged involvement in these crimes in Canada, that was not released in Canada, however. Can you confirm that? That was only released in the Washington Post, pardon me.
So this is not an information we provided to the journalists.
Pardon me, it was not information you provided?
No.
Who provided that information then to the journalist? You're not sure? But that was not yourself who provided that information, was it?
We did not.
Mr. Morrison, can you comment? Did you provide that information?
The journalist called me and asked me if it was that person. I confirmed it was that person.
Oh, you confirmed. So you did.
This is a journalist who's written extensively on this topic. Mm-hmm. A journalist that has various sources. Mm-hmm. He asked me if that was one of the people, and I confirmed that it was.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. In that day, you can confirm, both Mr. Duran and Mr. Morrison, that the Prime Minister did not release these information to the Canadian public, but it was released in the Washington Post, correct?
Released in the Washington Post, yes. I'm just racking my memory for exactly what the Prime Minister said.
Mr. Ray, you advise the Prime Minister on issues of national security and intelligence, correct? You're the top advisor in Canada, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you advise him not to release that information publicly in Canada?
So we worked with the Prime Minister and the different ministers in terms of their public statements, and I think this is what I can say. Like we advised and we review what was going to be the Q&As and the public statement by the Prime Minister and the different ministers.
I'm trying to understand why it is the Washington Post received information when the Deputy Commissioner, or pardon me, the Commissioner, the Prime Minister, the Public Safety Minister, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs did not provide that information to Canada. And in fact, Canadians wouldn't know unless they were able to read the Washington Post. I just find that quite unfair to the Canadian public that details were released in advance to the Washington Post and confirmed, according to Mr. Morrison, to the Washington Post, but not provided to Canada. Don't you find that odd?
The reason why we offered, as I said in my opening remarks, a background interview to the Washington Post was really to make sure that our side of the story will become clearly and be widely spread, especially at the international level. That was the strategy behind the background interview we gave.
You are the National Security Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, so you take direction from him, and do you take direction from anyone else in his office, his Chief of Staff, for example?
No.
Only from the Prime Minister. Did the Prime Minister authorize you to leak this information to the Washington Post?
The Prime Minister did not direct us in terms of the media strategy. That was a strategy that we developed at the civil servant level. PMO and other MOs were aware of that mitigating strategy if India wished to not collaborate with us, but Prime Minister did not direct us to do it, nor they approve what was going to be shared with the Washington Post.
As you said, they were aware that you were about to do it. Is that correct?
The old strategy has been shared with the Prime Minister and his office.
Including leaking the information to the Washington
We did not leak information to the Washington Post.
My apologies, providing sensitive information to the Washington Post that you did not provide publicly to anyone else.
We did not provide any classified information to the Washington Post.
Sensitive intelligence was provided to the Washington Post that was not provided to Canadian journalists, correct?
So the conversation we had with the Washington Post, I think I have explained already what was the purpose of that, and the parameter of the conversation has been discussed amongst ourselves.
I appreciate that. It would seem like a leak because it wasn't provided to Canadian journalists. It wasn't provided to the Canadian public. In fact, the Canadian public would not be aware unless they read the Washington Post and subsequent Canadian reporting on what was included in the Washington Post. And from my perspective, that certainly seems like a leak, and it certainly is concerning that was done without knowledge of Canadian officials who are reporting on this, Mr. Rand, but I appreciate your perspective on that. To the Commissioner...
J'aimerais donner l'occasion à mon collègue.
I'd like to give my colleague an opportunity to answer.
This same issue.
Sure.
Within our strategy, we were talking to different audiences. And so we deliberately chose, as Madame Durand said in her introductory remarks, a credible, internationally read newspaper that would carry our side of the story. We chose a journalist who had a long record of background in this particular issue. He had written on it a number of times before. And through the Washington Post, we were speaking directly to our friends in the United States. We were speaking to our allies in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And we were also speaking directly to Indians.
Mr. Morrison, just on that then, so the leak or the non-leak was an effort to get the Americans on board for the Canadian perspective. Was it an effort then, in other words, to have American elected officials, those in the President's office, for example, read the Washington Post and be further compelled to back up Canada in this regard? Was that sort of, in other words, in plain language, is that what the objective was?
What I would say is that we approached this whole series of events, including our approach that we adopted in going to Singapore. We were talking to our closest allies who share similar concerns from the beginning.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Minister. To the Commissioner, just in your original press release, you had mentioned that in February 2024, the RCMP created a multidisciplinary team to investigate and coordinate efforts to combat this threat. Who initiated that multidisciplinary team, and who were the members of it? In that, were they beyond the RCMP? Did they include members at this table today, for example?
We did initiate it. There's two teams that we initiated. One with all the extortions and harassment that we're seeing predominantly in Alberta, Vancouver, as well as in Toronto general area. We had a coordination team out of BC that was looking after that, but we also felt the need to put a team together to look at violent extremists and foreign interference, which involves several government departments that are part of this task force.
Who initiated that?
I believe that Deputy Commissioner Flynn initiated that.
Okay, so it was not direction from anyone at this table or anyone from the Prime
no.
Minister's office
No.
to engage in. Was that team central to the subsequent events that we heard over Thanksgiving?
I would say that team, there was already independent investigations going on before this team was created. This was more to bring a whole government approach as what we're seeing from the intelligence-wise from the criminal side.
To my final seconds here. So this was the first time that a whole of government approach was taken, was February 2024.
At this size, yes. But other than that, there's daily work with the service and other government departments on a ad hoc basis when required.
Duhem, were any of the killers, the alleged killers of Mr. Najjar, known to the RCMP before the killings took place in that investigation?
The Najjar case is right now is before the courts, and I'm not going to make any comments on the Najjar file as it's before the courts. Disclosure will happen in due course through the judicial process.
But it's been publicly reported that the four killers, we have Amandeep Singh, Karen Brar, Karen Preet Singh, Kamal Preet Singh, forgive me if the pronunciation's incorrect, these alleged killers were all temporary residents. Is that the case?
I would have to go back in my notes to confirm that these were all temporary residents. I couldn't answer.
Reported in the news. Can any of the other witnesses comment on that? This has been publicly reported in the Toronto Sun. Was nobody aware at our RCMP services that of any criminal background of these characters before they were allowed to come to Canada?
I'm not saying that nobody is not aware. What I'm saying is the matter is before the courts, and we're not going to comment on it.
Well, this has nothing to do with the current investigation, Commissioner, but it has a concern. It has a concern about whether or not our country is prepared to protect our national security. That's what we're talking about today. And if people with criminal backgrounds are coming to our country, being allowed to come to our country through the temporary resident program and possibly through the international student program, that's a serious breach of our national security. And that's our immigration system after 9 years of this Liberal government. In the case of Amandeep Singh, who has been accused of killing Mr. Najjar, were you aware that Amandeep Singh was on bail when the killing took place of Mr. Najjar?
Again, I'd have to go through my notes of the briefing because it happened quite some time ago, and a lot of things have happened since then.
Well, I guess I'll enlighten the committee. As was reported in the Toronto Sun, there was a March 2023 warrant for fleeing police and the dangerous operation of a motor vehicle in Surrey, BC last November. He was pinched on firearms and drug charges in Brampton. He was out on bail at the time of the Peel Region incident. He agreed in Surrey that he wouldn't possess firearms or ammo or get behind the wheel of the car. He made his first court appearance in June 16th of 2023. 2 days later, this is according to the Toronto Sun, Sikh Canadian activist Hardeep Singh Najjar was killed. Why are these dangerous criminals who are here as temporary residents, possibly here as international students, I don't know what educational institution they're attending, why are they allowed to be out on bail? This is like, if we're watching these people, we know they're a threat to national security. Why are they here? Why are they allowed to be out on bail? Why are they allowed to walk Canadian streets?
Chair, the answer to that, I think one is the process of providing them visas or access to entry into Canada. It's best to be posed to IRCC. And if people are released on bail before the courts, that's got nothing to do with the RCMP. It's a judicial process that we operate within.
I think Canadians will be somewhat concerned. We have, many of the lead figures from our national security establishment, and there doesn't appear to be any sort of coordination between Immigration Canada, between our security services, and I'm not getting a lot of confidence today that our national security is being protected in this country under this government when it appears that our immigration system has been compromised in this case, when it appears that our justice system is being compromised, and these accused killers are being allowed to walk on the street and go after Canadian citizens, particularly Canadian citizens of Sikh background. I think that's deeply concerning to me, and I think that should be a major focus of what this investigation is. What processes did our country have that could have prevented this? Yes, we can talk about briefing foreign media outlets in order to get this information out. We can talk about the fact that the Prime Minister had information on this, but if we're not fixing our systems like our immigration system and our justice system, it's going to allow these very dangerous criminals to walk on our street. How long have you been investigating, Commissioner Duham, how long have you been investigating Indian foreign interference on Canadian soil?
Oh, I wouldn't be able to provide the committee with an exact date.
It just seems, it just seems to me that this has become an issue very recently, and I suspect it has been a long time issue, but it really seems to have come to a boil in the last few years. Can you tell this committee maybe why this has become an issue in the last few years? It seems to have become a big issue.
Whole question, I would take you back when the director of CSIS, former director David Vigneault, brought to the forefront the immediate risk to Canadians with the ideological motivated violent extremists. That was pretty new to us because it wasn't on the radar. And I would say foreign interference, although it was probably happening way before it came to the forefront like it is right now. But I think it's a phenomenon that we've learned over the years, and it's present more now than what we've seen before because there's probably more intelligence and work being done.
And I'm not saying that this has never been an issue and that it only became an issue recently.
Lloyd.
This has obviously been a serious issue, and so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for being here, witnesses. And Commissioner, I specifically want to thank you for the work that you and your members have done on this file that you didn't give it up 11 months ago and longer. And thank you for the work that you've done and bringing this as far as you have, and I wish you the best in continuing to work on it. I do have a question. When you're dealing with sensitive national security information, not necessarily you, Commissioner, maybe this is more to Mr. Wan, when you're dealing with sensitive national security information, who can declassify that? Who has the authority to do that?
The owner of the intelligence products. So, for example, let's say you have something that have been published or released.
That's the standard in the intel world. The owner can release it. Now you are a consumer of that. You don't create your own intel. You're as the national security intelligence advisor to the PM. You're the consumer of intelligence, right?
Right.
So who do you get to authorize the release? You don't call it sensitive information or it was classified. But I mean, I read the National Post article. I'm telling you what. That's pretty sensitive information, pretty classified information. So someone above you, who the owner of that intel had to give you authority to release that to the Washington Post, did you not?
So as I said many times, we have not shared classified information with the journalists. Maybe I can add that what we discussed with the journalists was exactly what we told all your leaders when we briefed your leaders.
Right. Including Mr. Poilievre.
Including Mr. Poilievre.
Thank you. And again, I don't want to play semantics, but I mean, I would consider some of the information that you told was not made public, would not normally have been made public under different circumstances. Commissioner Duhaime has made that very, very clear. It could impact the criminal investigation and jeopardize the lives of many individuals. Commissioner, you stated very recently, I don't know the exact time, but within the last week or so, that you would have concerns if the 6 diplomats were to be replaced. Does that remain your position?
My comment was that I do have concerns considering how the government of India operates, but I also shared in that same interview that I'm not familiar with the background process that's in place when a diplomat or a consular official is appointed to a country. So perhaps Mr. Morrison would be better placed to explain on the security side or checks.
Mr. Morrison, do you share those same concerns, and what does that look like for global affairs?
We will continue to let the dust settle, and then there's a lot of dust, and then we will work with our counterparts to ensure that both sides have adequate representation in each other's countries. There's a process of screening where when a country applies to accredit its diplomats, we work as Global Affairs Canada with the security agencies to ensure there's no adverse information. And assuming that's the case, then we accredit new diplomats.
Thank you. And quickly, Commissioner, you had mentioned here just a couple minutes ago about it's reasonable to assume, in fact, it's occurring, that India also experiences violent extremism, differently than we do here. You indicated that that's a reality. Now, is it possible that criminals from Canada are giving direction to operas in India, just like it's alleged to be vice versa to Canada?
I mean, after coming out on October 14th, anything's possible. We can't discount that, but that's the importance of working with our colleagues in India so we can work together and address the people who are involved.
I lost track, maybe 4, 5, 6, 9 times. My friend was keeping track in her opening question, so I think the people who are being overly partisan are perhaps on the other side of the table today. But anyways, we've got a serious issue ahead of us. They can smirk, they can laugh, but let's get into some of the questions here. First to Mr. Morrison and Mr. Uan. An NSCOP report from 2019 stated that CSIS observed an increase in Indian threat-related activity targeting the Indo-Canadian, diaspora and government institutions. This same NSCOP report found that Indian consular officials were maintaining blacklists of dissidents, controlling travel visas to India, and recruiting community sources that were engaging MPs and political candidates to advance Indian objectives. Given that each of your organizations presumably read this report at the time and knew about these activities dating back to at least 2019, which very clearly fall outside of the norm of diplomatic activity, why did the government wait until these threats had escalated to the point of violence and murder to expel any consular officials?
I think as Natalie said and has been testified to today, the various parts of the government have been live to the issue of foreign interference for a number of years and have been taking all kinds of measures when the situation reached its apex, as has been described, and as the RCMP has said, when they came to us and sought our help, we then used one of our heaviest diplomatic tools, which was the persona non grata tool. But I wouldn't assume that Indian foreign interference was not a constant subject of discussion throughout that time period, 2019 until the present, in all of our interactions with India.
Mr. would you like to?
L'Inde est aussi.
India is also a priority for the work of the service. So when it comes to the resources we deploy to identify various strategies by India, that's one of the countries we concentrate on more.
To Mr. Duham, thank you for being here today. Through a lot of the reports we've read and a lot of the indications that a lot of this crime that we're talking about is going on here is being funneled through organized crime groups that are here in Canada. What have we done, or what have you done, or what have your group or the government done to disrupt the communication lines between organized crime groups and the Indian government to ensure this doesn't continue?
Well, the fact, Mr. Chair, that we came out publicly, that was one of the strategies we had to ensure that the message is out and that the community is aware and the community will report it, making sure that people from the community do not fall victims to influence and whatnot. And it's continuing to work with our government departments as to maintaining not oversight, but a view of what's going on in Canada with regards to Government of India's influence on criminal activities in Canada.
Thank you for that. And I have a quick question. I've really been intrigued today by Mr. Morrison and Mr. Nguyen. I'm going to quote your words back to both of you. You have both said that you've decided to go to the Washington Post to make sure you went to a respected and credible newspaper. By that, do you feel there are no respected or credible newspapers in Canada?
Go back to, I think we said international outlet, sir. And this is a very important.
You did say you wanted to go to a respected and credible news source, and you used the Washington Post.
I think I explained that, and that has nothing to do, quite the contrary. And I also said in my opening remarks that the pretension of India are not right, but they pretend that our India file is politically motivated, and that our media are into that scheme too. So this is why we use an international outlet, because we knew that those allegations from India would resurface. So that was the nexus and the reason to go with an international outlet.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley.
Mr. Chair, again, thank you to all the witnesses for being here. It is quite the panel that we have, the Commissioner of the RCMP, the National Security Advisor, the Director of CSIS, and two top-level Deputy Ministers for Public Safety and Global Affairs. I appreciate your time very much and your commitment to national security in this country. I have no doubt that you all work extremely hard to keep Canadians safe. And ultimately, of course, you all answer to the Prime Minister in some way or another. He is the head of our government. And you'll recall certainly in the 2015 when Mr. Trudeau first became Prime Minister, a document was released called Open and Accountable Government. I'm sure you're all familiar. It mentions in there that as the head of government, the Prime Minister has special responsibility for national security, federal, provincial, territorial relations, and the conduct of international affairs. Do you all agree that he is the head of our national security apparatus, the Prime Minister? Does anyone disagree with that? No. So the responsibility ultimately ends with him, as you have agreed. And we are in a circumstance here where multiple individuals, one for sure, and perhaps others, according to the Washington Post article, have been murdered through direct ties to the government of India. Quite an extraordinary situation on our hands. We also have a situation where we have a foreign interference inquiry with Justice Hogue, where the real center of that is that China has been interfering in multiple elections, looking to undermine our democracy. We have misinformation en masse from Russia. We have issues from Iran. We have issues from Pakistan, others. Canada, from my understanding, has never quite been in this type of, we'll call it a pickle, to put it lightly, where so many adversaries and others who we thought were certainly friends are coming at Canada from all angles. Is there any other time in history you can point to Canada facing this many threats in this way domestically from foreign actors? Is there any other time in the last two generations, for example?
Si vous me permettez, peut-être ce que je peux dire, c'est que il est vrai.
What I could say is that it's true we have to take seriously any attempt at foreign interference. I think that some of us here stated that during the last election, the elections were fair and were not marked by the consequences of foreign interference. As parliamentarians, you adopted Bill C-170.
That wasn't specifically my question. I do appreciate your commentary in response to my commentary, but that was not directly answering my question. But I'll just put that aside for now. As actually our colleague from the NDP mentioned, the NCCOP report labeled Canada a low-risk, high-reward for foreign adversaries, in essence, to come to Canada and wreak havoc and cause a lot of crime and chaos and even death now from India, for example, as you've mentioned. And so my concern is that the leadership leadership from the top, given the only individual ultimately responsible for national security, and we have death on our hands. We had 13 more individuals in peril. From an objective analysis, things are not going that well in Canada. I appreciate there's things that you've done that we'll never know, but we should be grateful for. I appreciate that very much. But the fact that there's individuals being murdered in Canada is beyond comprehension from a foreign government. I'm sure you would agree. From our perspective as the official opposition tasked with holding the Liberal government accountable, this is an abject failure to maintain national security. The fact that individuals have been murdered, the fact that there are communities in this country, the Sikh community, for example, that have felt incredibly vulnerable under the so-called leadership of the current Prime Minister. So I think that really is the reason we are here is because he has failed to maintain national security. The reason we have the national inquiry into foreign interference is because there's been a failure to maintain the integrity of our democracy in terms of its attacks from China, and the confidence that creates, the confidence issue that creates across Canada is deeply concerning, and the message that sends to other adversaries that they could take advantage of our democratic process and our trusting nature. So I think that really needs to be underlined in the sense that you can only do what your limitations are, what the leadership of this country are. So I just wanted to underline that because I feel that there seems to be an obsession with members opposite with the opposition leader, when I wish that the Liberal members would apply that same energy to holding their own Prime Minister accountable for failing to stop the murders of a number of people in Canada from a foreign government, for failing to stop interference into our elections. That's really quite a frustrating matter that has happened under their watch as they've been part of the Liberal government. And so, Mr. Chair, I just conclude that, again, I thank you for your efforts, and I appreciate very much what you've done to protect Canadians and to fill the gaps for the lack of leadership from our Prime Minister to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.